In every appointment that I've ever had in the last few days that I've been in that appointment, I've always tried to acquire a little gift, something to remind me of my time spent in that appointment. Sometimes I've bought the gift, sometimes the gift has been given to me. Here in Birmingham, on the wall of my office, I have a picture, and it's a picture of my last appointment. It's a picture of Gloucester Docks. It was given to me by the Secretary at the Royal British Legion to thank me for the work that I'd managed to do with them over my time there. I cherish this picture. I have it hanging there because it reminds me of good times. Over the years, I've managed to acquire quite a lot of little pictures of places where I've been: the North East, the South Coast, London, Australia. I've got plenty of pictures of Australia. And in time, I've no doubts there'll be a picture of Birmingham as well. Farewell gifts are important, and there in the upper room, that's exactly what Jesus was doing. He was leaving gifts at a time of farewell to the disciples. Yesterday, we saw how he'd managed to give a beautiful gift of his love to them by washing their feet. Well, today, we look at the next stage of this time in the upper room. The Passover meal was a very solemn event. It was a time where the people would give thanksgiving to God for his deliverance, for his guidance, and for his goodness during their time in the wilderness. You'll remember that bread was a very symbolic thing in the wilderness years. It was symbolic of God's faithfulness in providing manna. And so at the Passover meal, bread was an important part of the celebration. The host would take the bread, very much like this, probably a much flatter bread, but he would tear it, he would break it, and as he tore it and gave it to people around the table, he would give thanks. And that's exactly what Jesus did that evening in the upper room. Listen to Luke's Gospel as he tells the story of this event. When the hour came, Jesus and his apostles reclined at the table, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it again until it finds fulfillment in the kingdom of God. After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, Take this and divide it among you, for I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took the bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. It's quite a picture that Jesus used. This is my body given for you. In breaking open the bread, Jesus was suggesting that he will be open for them. He was offering himself for them, and by speaking of his blood being poured out, they would understand that this was him saying he was going to offer his very life. Quite simply, he was saying to them, I'm offering you the gift of myself. I'm offering you the gift of myself. And yet they would also realise that this offer demanded a response. It was an invitation for them to commit themselves to him in return. Jesus says to each of us this Holy Week, I'm offering you the gift of myself. Will you in return give yourselves to me? And then the mood in the room changes. The mood in the room changes. Jesus, in distributing the bread, he speaks of a betrayer. Listen as John chapter 13 tells us this little bit of the story. After he'd said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, Very truly, I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it into the dish." Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Well, if there was a pleasant atmosphere in the room, it suddenly disappeared. Judas took the bread that Jesus had offered to him, and John tells us that at that point he left the room to plot his act of betrayal. Jesus then goes on to tell them that he's only going to be with them for a little bit longer, and that they would desert him, and that Peter would deny him 3 times. Why tell them all this? Why mention this? Why show and reveal his anxiety, his distress? Wasn't exactly encouraging now, was it? Well, perhaps he wanted them to know that even though they would desert him, he wasn't going to desert or forsake them. They would hurt him, and yet he would love them. I find Jesus' actions to be quite challenging in this circumstance. I find them very applicable to my own life. You know, the disciples' hands on that Last Supper evening would reach out. They'd reach out to receive the gift of bread that Jesus offered to them. His heart was reaching out to them, and yet in return, they would not be able to give themselves to him. Today, this morning, I want us to consider the simple act of stretching out a hand. I don't want you to reach out to pick up any of this bread or anything that you've got on your own table at home. I want you to reach out your hand as a symbolic act of a life reaching out to God today. Jesus says to us, I'm offering you the gift of myself. Will you, in return, give yourselves to me? Let's reflect on that today.